Funny.
All right. So hello and welcome everyone to the Conscious Altruism Chats. My name is Sam Mark and I'm the founder of the Conscious Altruism Movement, which is a passion project of mine seeking to provide fertile grounds for diverse leaders, change makers, advocates, and community members to plant the seeds that lead to mobilizing and driving grassroots movements that can reach global impact. Today, I'm joined by three amazing humans I am so excited to introduce you all to, or rather, I will let them all introduce themselves in a little bit. I've gotten to know each of today's participants through very different means, but what I know to be true is that each of us are activists in our own right. And we're all actively working within our own realms of influence to create safer spaces for our communities, challenge societal norms, and do it all with love most of the time. Before we get started on today's topic of polyamory and ethical non-monogamy, I'm going to go through a little bit of housekeeping so we can all approach these conversations with the same general understanding, not just for today's participants, but for those of you who are tuning in. But if you don't want to listen to the next 2 minutes, feel free to use the timestamps in the description below and skip to any section you feel drawn to. If you haven't done so already, I absolutely appreciate you hitting the subscribe button, liking this video, and sharing with your networks. Okay, so I'm going to be a loose facilitator today, meaning you don't need to wait for me to call on you or to speak or unmute. But if anyone starts to lose track of the conversation, I may or may not respectfully redirect it. Please do your best to speak from your own experience, but be very clear if you're speaking on behalf of observations that might be in line with your realm of expertise. So basically differentiate between personal opinion and facts and statistics. Please don't share information or personally identifiable information which you have not received express permission to share publicly. Caring for yourself is a high priority. So if you need to go off camera, step away, or self-regulate, it's 100% encouraged. And if and when it's needed. The point of these chats is to bring different perspectives. And so we don't all need to agree on those experiences. We just need to offer each other respect at all times. And last, all experiences are valid. It's okay to ask each other questions or follow-ups, and it's okay to decline to speak or answer if you're not comfortable. So with that, are there any questions or need for clarification on any of that?
No, feels good. Thank you, Sam.
Cool. So let's start with our introductions, and you can let us know as much or as little as you feel comfortable, such as who you are, where you're tuning in from, and the type of work or organizing that you do. And then a little bit on your relationships if you want, but we're definitely getting into that. And so, yeah, Rohan, if you'd like to start us off.
Totally. I'm Rohan. I use they, them, or he, him pronouns depending on the day. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, in the prairies. I'm a therapist, a community organizer, predominantly working in my own community, which is like queer and trans racialized folks. And yeah, a lot of the work I do is like supporting my own community, access like mental health care, various resources, and just engaging in like supportive conversations with folks as like in a queer adult, a trans adult, and also a non-monogamous adult in folks' lives, and trying to integrate that in the work that I've been doing. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
Yay, thank you. And Lilia?
Thanks, Rohan. I'm Lelia Gowland. I am based in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I'm a speaker and a writer, and I work with organizations that want to lead with authenticity so that they have more effective and happier teams. So that's what I do for work. And personally, the way that I came out later in life, I came out as queer and polyamorous at the ripe old age of 36 in the Huffington Post. And that very public declaration and my extended Catholic family in the Deep South made for a particular landscape for me, coming from a lot of privilege as a white identifying femme person who has a master's degree. I simultaneously wanted to use that privilege and have a really open conversation about identity and how it shows up in professional and personal settings. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I reached out to Sam after watching Sam and Aussie on The Ultimatum and just really, really pleased about how this space is already feeling so, so intentional. So thanks for having me.
Yay, thank you. And Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I use she, her. I am a community organizer with a background in psychology and primatology. For the psych aspect, I generally focus on minority-centered social systems. So that's where the community organizing comes in. I grew up in Southern California, and I am queer, ace, bi, demi, Indo-Caribbean, neurodivergent, first-gen, non-monogamous, and a little bit of a sporty spice. But those are all a bunch of labels that add up to a whole human being that is not any one of those things and is definitely more than the sum of any of them.
Those intros were so good, by the way. You all are naturals at this. But you are also welcome to, if any of you want to comment on any of the intros or like explore any of that now, you can do that. Or I have the first question that's going to be on your journey of self-discovery more and how you were like introduced to the different types of relationships. But yeah, if you want to comment on each other's intros first, feel free, or
Mostly you all seem very cool. And I'm sad that the locations you stated are very far away from any of us.
We are geographically inconvenient to one another.
Yes. Please don't be any more cool, because then I would want to pursue a friendship with you, and that would just be really inconvenient.
Y'all are welcome to come to Canada anytime.
Yeah, New Orleans, we are here for now, and if you want to visit, now is the time, given the dimensions of climate change.
Fair.
That's kind of my goal too, is trying to get people together who I feel like would genuinely like each other. I'm like, oh, I can't wait for this one because you will all love each other.
Well, and Kelly and Rohan, I really appreciate the ways that you've prioritized your communities in the work you do on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things that I really that has been an evolution for me over the course of my life is, how do I engage with the social justice work that I'm really passionate about and simultaneously operate as an entrepreneur? And so I'm just really grateful to be in your company and grateful for the work that you're both doing professionally, and it sounds like personally as well.
I appreciate that. I think that for me, I spent a lot of time working in various nonprofits and various orgs, and it kind of got to the point that I just like to be able to do things the ways that our community needed them to be done. I needed to take a step back from a lot of these predominantly white, predominantly cishet like nonprofit orgs, at least in my city. And so I started private practice a couple of years ago, and that was something I said that I would never do. Like, I was like, I never want to charge people for therapy, and it kind of got to the point that I was able to see my community for free and like do like a lot of free work, but then also charge people who can't afford to pay for it. And so, because obviously like stuff is expensive and continues to get more expensive, so I hear you. And also, mental health care is a right and should be free and accessible for folks, especially folks who like can't afford to pay for it. So I was kind of able to find like a balance point of like being able to meet my own needs, but then also be able to show up for community in like really intrinsic, like meaningful ways. And like the folks who generally get like free therapy and free mental health care are folks who are like queer and racialized, and oftentimes like navigating houselessness or transience or poverty or some combination of those intersections. And so that's kind of how I found a balance between like working for myself and also showing up. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's kind of how I did it.
No, I love to hear your journey. My friend Lindsay Bryan Podvin is a financial therapist who's biracial and talks a lot about like therapy and pricing, which I think is a really fascinating intersection of, what I would call a social justice orientation, to say, what is my investment in community? And simultaneously, I live in a capitalist society. Given that reality, how am I making sense of how I spend my time? So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I think this would be a good time to kind of segue into those self-discovery journeys too. Like, I'm so curious to hear more about how you all have just, navigated life in all of the different ways. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe Kelly, go for it.
Okay, so I guess that would be me. So what is your specific area of life development that you are interested in hearing about?
I mean, it's not just for me, Kelly, it's for the viewers. Just kidding.
And for everybody.
But no, like just like your relationship journey. I mean, everybody kind of started their journeys in different ways, or maybe learned about non-monogamy and polyamory in different ways. There may have been a lot of misconceptions, not even may have, there's a lot of misconceptions.
Okay.
And so navigating through that.
We're diving into the topic. So we're in
Yeah,
polyamory discovery.
yeah.
Okay. So for me personally, I grew up not necessarily from my family, but from my community in like a very harsh purity culture. Like the town I grew up in is very much one religion, to the extent that going to a public school almost felt like going to a religious school, because the vice president, the vice principal, the principal, all the counselors, all the teachers are all the same religion, which I was not a part of. But so I had the community pressure of purity culture. And so initially started from that idea of like virginity until marriage, and like mononormativity, heteronormativity. And then somewhere I went to college at UC Santa Cruz, which is definitely not in line with that sort of culture. But my first introduction to polyamory was mildly embarrassing, was through Burning Man. Uh, so that was the first time I saw folks who had like multiple partners who all knew about each other. And this was like a very big thing. And I came into that with very much something I think is pretty common, but also like, oh, fresh, which was like, wow, if that works for you, that's amazing. I could never do that. I get so jealous, which I feel like anybody who is in any adjacency or part of the polyamorous community has heard that sentence. So just like immediate myth dispel, polyamorous people also feel jealousy. They just don't fear it in the same way, I guess. But yeah, so I was introduced to it through that. And initially it didn't look like something I was interested in. And then about 5 years after initially seeing that was an option, I fell for someone who was already polyamorous. So got kind of dragged in sideways. And being the nerd that I am, immediately my thought was, oh, I guess I should do some research. So I read all the books and all the blogs and watched a bunch of videos and all of that. And that was, 2014. So that would have been 10 years ago. And I found that being polyamorous actually really fit me much better. I used to be the sort of person who would get in trouble for being too flirty when I don't even realize I'm being flirty. So having different constraints on a relationship just established explicitly from the beginning is very helpful for me. But yeah, so that is sort of my nutshell version of how I came to polyamory.
Yeah. And also people can be nice and it's not always flirty.
Yeah,
By the
I mean,
way.
I have a problem because I like, if you are being nice to someone of a different gender, sometimes it's taken as flirty, especially if you're a similar age and if maybe like they find you attractive or something like that. But like, I'm bisexual, so does that mean I can have no friends? Like, what am I supposed to do? So I'm like, okay, I will just sit in a corner and talk to no one. But yeah, no, I'm just like a very friendly person in general.
Yeah, it's totally not the same.
I'm laughing at Burning Man as sort of proxy for a level of safety for me. So I'm a parent, and the big part of my fear about coming out was the impact on my kiddo. And at this new school that's, I'm trying to anonymize my child as much as possible. So at this new school, I met another parent and was concerned about how I was going to come out as poly and share this identity. And then she told me that she met her husband when she was living in a van with her sister at Burning Man. And I was like, yeah, she's going to be fine. And so I really appreciate the way that these sort of immersive spaces can give us language that we might not have had otherwise, expose us to things that we might not have had otherwise. And then for me, as somebody who's very straight presenting, I have a husband, I have a blonde hair, blue-eyed kiddo. My house literally came with a white picket fence. It's falling apart, which feels kind of representative. And so what I recognize for me in my journey is like finding the safety in coming out really publicly was a long time in hiding. And so I've been queer my whole life and polyamorous my whole life, but I sort of came into poly identity 13 years ago when a friend from graduate school gifted me the book The Ethical Slut as my graduation present. And he was just like, we'd taught sex education together. And he just said, hey, I think you might like this. And he's not poly, he doesn't, but I was just like, oh, well, that fundamentally changed my life. Thank you. And I was dating 3 people at the time, like casually exes, this embarking on a new relationship with my now husband. And I called each of them and I said, hey, I like practiced my little speech. And I said, hey, I'm reading this book. I think I want to explore polyamory. Is that something, or open relationships? I definitely did not call it polyamory. Open relationships. Is that something you would consider? 2 of them said, fine. And my now husband now tells me, I was so excited, but I wanted to seem chill about it. I didn't want to like it to seem like I was too eager, but it's something I had been thinking about too. And so I was really fortunate that my journey into polyamory was with a trusted partner who was also exploring it for the first time. And Kelly and Rohan and Sam, I don't know how, like, what your community looked like at the time, but I can assure you that we were the only people I knew exploring polyamory openly or open relationships. The only exception was my gay male friends, whose version of it looked very different than ours, which was very much just sex, casual sex. And so for me, it was incredibly isolating. And part of the reason I've felt so passionate about being open about this identity, particularly in the Deep South, is because it has such stigma. And at least until just a few years ago, this wasn't an identity that was socially acceptable, at least here in the South. And so it felt really important to me to publicly share that. It's been a long journey, and I'm really excited to see more visibility for polyamory and really connect deeply with community here in New Orleans that's been established over the last decade, and be in conversation with the 3 of you.
Yeah, and I've been wanting to do this chat for a while now. And it was when Kelly like hosted a polyamory event for the org where I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this now. No more waiting.
I
You
am the
inspired me.
sign.
Thank you. Yeah, Rowan, go for it.
For sure. I definitely relate to, some of what we kind of talked about already, where like polyamory has definitely been a part of my life for my whole life. I just didn't realize that's what it was. Because I remember just having very deep and very close friendships and close relationships with folks, especially growing up like as a trans person in like a predominantly like cis het white community neighborhood. I did feel very isolated as a child and as a youth. And so I definitely found solace in my relationships with community. And so that's kind of where it started for me, I guess, without having language to describe that. Because I think that, especially as queer and trans folks, racialized folks, folks navigating like multiple intersections, it's so easy to feel disconnected that we form relationships that don't look like cishet, casual friendships might look like. And so I grew up with that kind of framework, and community became so important, just like obviously in my work, but also just like in my life. And both of these things had so many, such a big impact on my life and the lives of people around me, that I still just didn't have the language for it. But I was like, monogamy can't possibly be it for me. In the sense that like, it wasn't, I met one of my partners when I was 17. So I was newly out. I came out at 16. And so I was newly out and then met one of my partners, so I'm still with today. We've been together for, what is it, almost 15 years at this point, 14 years, almost 15. But seeing as we met when we were so young, we were both going through a lot of things and we were both struggling a lot. And so it was those very deep relationships with my friends that like, got me through a lot of things that like maybe me and my partner couldn't figure out together. And so I just had multiple very close, very intimate in different ways, like relationships, if that makes sense, from quite an early age. And as like a demisexual person, demi-romantic person, it just like didn't quite, I didn't really see the difference. Like I did, like there was a difference, but it was just so, the line was very like blurred even as like a young child. And obviously that was before I understood like boundaries and like direct communication and all those things. I was just a child who was in desperate need of like collectivism and community. And then I got older and became an adult, and started to learn more about like the political um, impact of non-monogamy, specifically relationship anarchy. And I definitely like started using that language to identify. And I no longer use that language just because that's not the direction that my life kind of took. But relationship anarchy was super important to me growing up because I was like, okay, so this like, um, what's the word? I guess it like does not center or does not prioritize like the couple form as like being the primary, most like significant, most important relationship. Like it kind of throws down the picket fence and like builds up like a sense of like collective that I just didn't have growing up. And also it really like played into a lot of the work that I was doing too, like in the sense of like building community and prioritizing community. So it only really made sense that once I actually became an adult and started to like understand relationship structures and stuff like that, that just like polyamory just made sense for my life in terms of building community in my own relationships as well. And so 6 years ago, I met my other partner. So I currently have two romantic partners, and I definitely lucked out that the two of them are also very close friends, and so that that definitely helped. And then I also have a couple of platonic partners as well, which like platonic partnership is like a whole another thing, but I definitely like group it in terms of like polyamory and like collective and community building as well. And yeah, I think it's interesting though, because I definitely was of that mindset as well when I was like a kid. Like I was a teenager. I was like, I could never do the polyamory thing. Like I knew other people who were doing it. I was like, I could never do that. And I'm not sure why. Obviously, like monogamy is ingrained in society in so many different ways. Um, but also like I think it was like I was operating from a place of scarcity and fear as like the only brown trans kid, the only whatever. And then once I started to build community, it became more and more apparent that it wasn't just me. Like it wasn't scarce or isolated or disconnected. It was like we were building. And then it felt safe to explore, different kinds of relationships with different folks. And my partner actually always knew she was polyamorous, like when we were teenagers. The partner who I've been with for so many years, she was like, "Yeah, I'm polyamorous." And I remember being a kid and being like, "Why?" Like, I just didn't get it. And now I talk about these things all the time because it is such a big part of my life. So it's just like interesting that at that time it was something that I just could not understand, even though it's so organic and intuitive as well. Um, yeah, and so now as a grown adult, it's pretty cool because I get to talk to like queer youth about like their non-monogamous journeys, and hold space for that, and also just like be, queer polyamorous adults who are like able to like live life together in like a safe and like ethical, healthy way. And I get to like be that person in a lot of folks' lives, and I think that's pretty cool, honestly.
It's super important too, beyond being cool. Like I know my life would be impacted hugely if I had anyone who looked like you or like me in my view as a young person.
100% you.
But I like hugely related to a bunch of things that you said. Like when you were talking, like the first thing that popped in my head was like queer platonic relationships. Like that's such a thing where like it's definitely deeper than like a regular platonic relationship, but it's not a romantic relationship. And yeah, I feel like that kind of stuff that comes up from out of like the asexual and demisexual community is things that I have been discovering more recently, like maybe in the last like 5 years, but definitely stuff that like I wish I knew about sooner. Like hearing you say that you've known about this stuff like forever is like so much reverse envy.
Uh,
Like the idea that like if you're demisexual and bisexual and friendly, where is the line between friendships and romantic relationships? And if you're in a monogamous relationship, then like, are you allowed to have friends? Like it does make it kind of weird. And there's like the like false sense of safety of monogamy as well, where like, well, if my partner never dates anyone else, they'll never know that other people exist and they'll never leave me, which is obviously false, since like people break up in all types of different relationship styles. But yeah, and like the thing you said about having like really deep, long friendships, at my last birthday party, besides one person, my wife is the person I had met most recently. Like everyone at that birthday party I'd known for like 10 plus years. And actually last month was the 10-year anniversary of my wife and our first date. So like that, she was 2 years shy of the next nearest relationship. So, like
That's
having friendships
beautiful.
be like really important and centered in a different way, or maybe even not even centered, just like decentering romantic couplehood is something that I really relate to. And like I only learned the word relationship anarchy like last year, even though I've been in polyamory in practice for a while.
Lilia, you're on mute.
Amateur hour over here. So, but you both raised such interesting points about how much we're centering sexuality in all of, like, when we talk about polyamory, I think there's really interesting pushback of like, it's not just about sex, but then that like slut shames people for whom the sex is an important part of it. And I just think at a societal level, we have this false narrative about sexuality being the determinant of depth of connection. And so while I don't identify as ace or demisexual, and is it helpful for folks to get definitions for those terms? Sam, you know your audience better than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I can
to Kelly or Rohan to share.
I would be happy to do that definition if you want it.
Yeah.
So asexual describes attraction, so like bisexual being attracted to multiple genders, but asexual describes attraction, so it's folks who experience little or no attraction in a sexual way. So whether that means that you experience like none at all and have no interest or physical sexual attraction, or it's occasional, or it's conditional, or it's rare, or just infrequent. So asexuality is like a whole spectrum. And then within that spectrum, demisexuality, I think like the textbook definition for that is needing a emotional connection before you would feel a physical attraction. And if anyone else has a further expansion on that, or a more nuanced definition, please feel free to add in.
I think you're good.
Yeah, I think you got it.
So
I do DEI trainings.
I was gonna say this is like
I have to define asexual twice a semester.
Great. So what comes to mind for me, and I just think it's important to have shared language for viewers who may not be as familiar. So what excites me no end is how much the cultural conversation is shifting. And at least in queer rom-coms, which is one of my favorite genres of literature, wholly underrated, but I'm seeing more and more stories about ace and demisexual protagonists, that it's totally normalized. It's not even necessarily a plot point, which I just, like, I have chills. It's so exciting to me because I think it is such an important conversation to be having, to say, why does the nature of the sexual, why does my sexual relationship with someone have any impact on the depth of that connection? And my best friend with whom I am not sexual, but love deeply and have a long-term life partnership, why is that deprioritized over my partners with whom I'm having sex? That's not a relevant or salient data point if there is a lifelong commitment. And so I just really appreciate the way that conversation is shifting, and how polyamory allows us to say, but why does it matter? Because my instinct is it did not, right? Someone asked me recently in a wildly inappropriate conversation, as I was talking about my husband, she was like, are you still in love with him? Do you have sex with him? And I was like, do you still have sex with your husband? Like, how is that relevant? Or like, how does that have anything to do with our topic of conversation? And I think sometimes a challenge that I've noticed in queer spaces, in any space where we're talking about an identity, is it almost people feel entitled to information about my life that they are not in fact entitled to. And figuring out where those boundaries lie, I think, is a really interesting place of exploration for me as someone who writes personal essay and memoir and does disclose really vulnerably, but very intentionally.
It's interesting that that person in the same breath asked about love and sex as though they are the same thing.
Isn't it?
Right.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
I'm also curious of all of your perspectives too. For myself, I explored a lot of different relationships, and the ethical slut was like my Bible for a little short period of time. And for me, that exploration happened when I was exploring my sexuality and like who I was. I had lived, the first 20 something of my, well, let's not say the first 20 years. There was a lot of confusion blended in there, but I was primarily in like cis heterosexual relationships at the time. And it was when the universe was guiding me away from that I started exploring different things. And just like Kelly, I resonated so much with just like going online, looking up every blog possible, like joining all of these like conversations happening on the internet just to learn more. And that book came up, and that was one of my first like formal versions of like learning about polyamory. And what I'm curious to hear from you all are your perspectives too. I see certain similarities to say like bisexual invisibility, for example, of like if you are not in a polyamorous or non-monogamous relationship, that you are not that. You are only seen as one thing. And for myself, like I remember in my 20s, I would always tell my then partner, like, I feel like we have way more love to give than like anybody can handle. And that was like the only thing I knew how to describe it at the time. And it wasn't until later where I'm like, I think I just ended up with people who subscribe to traditional monogamous relationships, but that doesn't mean to say that I don't have the capacity to have non-monogamous relationships, right? So I'm just curious if any of you have anything about that. Maybe that falls under misconceptions. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that monogamy is so ingrained in so many different ways that I think it is like, I think it's so easy for people who are not aware of these topics and are not actively engaging in conversations to be like, well, if you're with multiple people, you're not monogamous. If you're with one person, you're like it's just like a binary. And obviously it's not a binary. And like so many things are not binaries, in our communities especially. And so like, of course, it makes sense that this is also like, yes, it's an identity, and also we have the capacity to have like different relationships at any point in our lives. Like I've always been non-monogamous without realizing it, and yet I only actively started being romantically polyamorous, whatever that even means, 6 years ago. And so, and even then, even when that started, I don't think I even really, I think if I have any regrets about my journey, it's like not even knowing that I was, like it wasn't an intentional decision. Like I wasn't like, okay, today's the day that I'm going to actively start, engaging in multiple relationships, and this is how it's going to work, and this is what we're going to do. It's like it just happened. And I think that's okay. And I think that obviously when we don't have language to like describe our experiences and our identities and so many things, it's inevitable that things are just going to happen. But I think that now, knowing what I know, it's like, well, it's possible to shift relationship forms and still hold on to your identity. So now I understand that, but it took me a long time to understand that. So it makes sense that people who are not actively involved in these conversations may also have that misconception. Doesn't make it okay and doesn't make it right, but it does make sense that it happens.
And I really appreciate your drawing the parallel to bisexual invisibility or femme invisibility, right? And the ways that feeling seen in a specific identity or feeling invisible in a specific identity can feel so isolating. And when I think about, I like stopped shaving under my arms, and that was like, I was taught as a woman, I know the horror, but growing up in the family that I did, I laughed that like my mom and my stepmom, I've never seen their toenails unpainted. Like my whole life, unless they are going under general anesthesia and it is a requirement from the doctor, or we are getting pedicures, like their nails are painted, their, underarm hair, like all the hair is removed from the appropriate places. And so for me, like exploring my gender presentation and how I perform femininity and how I perform queerness and how I perform polyamory is something that I think a lot about, particularly in professional spaces, which obviously centers patriarchy, white supremacy, and colonization. And so for me, when I hear you say, there's some invisibility in presenting as a cis couple or as a het couple or as a monogamous couple, that sometimes the identities that the visibility of our identities can be really complex. And so my first queer relationship was with a trans man, and we presented as a straight couple, and that was super validating to his identity. And he'd always dated women who were more masc. And so this was a really big deal for him. And I was so happy for his journey and identity. And it was an interesting time of introspection for me later in life to recognize how much my femme presentation and my lack of queer presentation informed his experience. There's someone at the door. The other piece of it for me was in my advocacy, presenting as straight was rewarded. And so I've worked since I was a teenager in LGBTQ+ issues, and presenting as the straight person was advantageous in Texas, talking to legislators and educators. And so I really witness kind of what I think you're referencing is that kind of pain and privilege of not feeling seen in all of our complexities and all of our identities.
Yeah, that's super relatable. I think it's hard to say 100% because I don't have like a perfect understanding of how I'm perceived. I literally have put out polls on social media just to be like, what are you getting here? So like, basically the information I've gotten back is that straight people think I'm straight and queer people think I'm queer. So that's the feedback I've gotten.
So
And unfortunately, what you said is true. I think that does help in advocacy work where people are assuming you're an ally and not part of the other group. And when I am organizing, because the community that I live in is pretty conservative, when I'm organizing, there are times that I think to myself, ooh, this might be a job for an ally that I'd like to send them to go do this, just so we don't have to do more back and forth before something gets done. So that is a very unfortunate reality. But Sam, you were saying about that you just happen to be in more like monogamous relationships. Well, normativity is normative, right? Like literally,
Right.
the word normal means majority. It's like the bell curve, right? It's the chunk in the middle. So when things that are normative, like being heterosexual or being monogamous, are kind of culturally reinforced, you're going to have more of that, even if the participants don't necessarily ascribe to that. So like you can have a situation where like a bisexual guy is dating a bisexual woman, but that's still not a heterosexual relationship because you can't have two queer people in a relationship and call it not queer. So
Or one person in a queer relationship.
yeah,
like
one person
mixed gender relationship.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the way where people I think there's like a trope I've heard a lot as a bisexual woman of like, oh well, if you're bi, you're going to end up with a guy anyways. And it's like, well, maybe we should let my wife know. She might have some feedback about that. But I mean, like, statistically, you're going to find more people who are straight. You're going to find more people who are monogamous. But it doesn't necessarily mean that even if it's perceived that way, that's really even what's happening.
Something that I've actively tried doing and being really conscious of is also when consuming media or watching movies and TV shows, is like I didn't realize how common it was for people to assume people to just be in like straight heterosexual people, even on TV, when I just started saying, you don't know that they're straight.
Oh yeah, you were
not
saying about that recently there have been more asexual characters in queer books. But then like basically that started very recently.
Mhm.
That's very recent. Up until that point, we had SpongeBob and Todd from BoJack Horseman. And that was like pretty much it of explicitly asexual characters. But yeah, representation is definitely important.
I saw a show. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's on Paramount Plus. I started watching it because I had like the free trial. It's Why Women Kill with Lucy Liu. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they actually have some pretty good representation of like different types of relationships in there, which was pretty cool. And I'm like, oh, I mean, granted, it's only a 2-season series because just like many things, it got canceled after the second season. But the first season was really good. And there's some problematic things, but I think overall that wasn't like the point of it. But if you end up getting the free trials of Paramount, I wouldn't pay for it. But
Sam, I'm curious. Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
So one of the reasons I reached out to you and Aussie after, or I can't remember, y'all may have reached out to me, whatever it was. Like
Yeah.
one of the things that I thought was so important about queer love, the ultimatum queer love, is watching a group of humans in a romantic context say, this person is not the only person that has ever lived that will ever tickle my fancy, and simultaneously navigate that in a queer context. And I mean, candidly, it was so affirming of my sexuality to watch all of these, not to be awkward about it, but like very attractive people who I was attracted to engage in this way. And it was so challenging for me not to yell at the screen, but what about polyamory? Like, how is this? Like, and like, what about non-binary folks? Because I'm definitely getting the sense that maybe we don't all use she, her as our pronouns, and that lack, and I don't want to put you in an awkward situation if there are things you don't want to say or talk about, but I just wanted to acknowledge how much, when we talk about representation, you and Aussie were really important to me personally, in seeing a pair really intentionally communicate and move through some big things with intentionality.
It's actually funny that you say that in some way, because I just had a conversation like a week or two ago. Someone that I met, I got to speak to their reality TV class. And one of the questions was about polyamory. I wasn't prepared for it, or I would have brushed up a little bit more. But one of the things that I said that I totally think is true is that if everybody there was more educated on polyamorous relationships and non-monogamy, none of the secrecy and the hiding and like healthy conversations would have been had, and many of us could have stayed friends.
I definitely have heard that before, where like the trope is that polyamory is so that people can have lots of sex, but really what it really is a lot of conversations about your feelings and boundaries.
Yes.
Like if
And
you
I
don't
think
like
that's
having
why
a lot of conversations about feelings and boundaries, maybe it's not for you.
Yeah.
Because communication is very important with one person, and for each person, that's like just another degree of freedom and chaos. So the communication has to be like exponentially better at each point.
Right.
I think that's why I was struggling to be like, where's the difference, even like as a youth, because right off the bat, especially as like marginalized people, and like queer people and trans people, I feel like communication was like super important in my relationships, and seeing as communication is like the core of relationships, I was just like, okay, so like I'm communicating with my partner, and I'm communicating with my like queer platonic partner, and I'm communicating with all these people. So it's like, all right, so what is polyamory then? And I eventually did figure it out, but it was like the base of all relationships is that like safe and healthy communication, which like we don't always get right all of the time, but I feel like we're trying, you know, and the more we learn about it, the easier it gets. Also, like talking about media, I feel like there was a show that came out recently about polyamory. I didn't watch it though, so I don't know if it's any good.
And I did watch it.
Was it good?
So it was essentially, I would say that I would recommend watching it just because it sparked a lot of really good conversations between me and my partners. But a lot of it was like, pause. So here's an example of what not to do. So essentially, most of the folks involved seem very new to polyamory, and it's a pretty common thing, I think, from the idea of monogamy has a sense of safety to it. That's really like a false sense of safety, where the first thing you want to try is dating together. Because then you get that like false idea of like, well, if I'm present, I can be in control, I can feel safe, I know what's going on, I have all the information. And so I think a lot of times when folks are transitioning, and this is 100% not speaking from my own experience, I've never opened a monogamous relationship. All of my polyamorous relationships have started polyamorous. So this is hugely speculative, but like I feel like there's a like an idea of that like if you date together it'll be safer, and that it's really more coming from like a place of insecurity than of a truly a desire to want to have a shared partner, which there are totally people who want to have shared partners. That is like fully a thing that can happen organically, but like to the shows seem to be going more along the idea of we're newish to polyamory, so we're going to try dating together, which is I feel like something that within the polyamory community folks kind of look out for as like a red flag, like, oh, you've never dated anyone besides your partner before and you're dating together, so like are you falling in the unicorn hunter sort of category? Or and there are folks who are super into that, and as long as the communication is working and it's all above board, like that's awesome. But like to be motivated by insecurity is definitely less of a good place to be motivated than by like a want for mutual love.
Would you define unicorn hunter for folks who might be unfamiliar?
You are killing it with remembering there's an audience. Yeah, so essentially, typically not always, because gender is a lie, and also sometimes really true. But typically a unicorn would be a bisexual woman that a couple that has like a heterosexual guy and a heteroflexible woman would be seeking as not necessarily a third equal partner, but sort of like something to make their relationship more interesting. And notice I said something, not someone. So like the idea is that like a unicorn hunter is somebody who is looking, a couple that is looking for a third in a way that is like shaded unethically. So maybe that third person is not going to have as much of a say in what happens around boundaries. Maybe that third person isn't allowed to date other people, but that's not what they want. It's just what the couple wants. But because the couple is a couple that's already like established, there's going to have couple privilege and be more weight. So essentially, yeah, your question was, what is a unicorn hunter? Unicorn hunter is a polyamorous couple that are looking for essentially a third, but not necessarily giving that third full humanity. And there are fully ways to healthily have a third or a fourth or be in like multiple person relationships. But the unicorn hunting is definitely a thing that happens towards the beginning of a lot of couples' polyamory journey.
And there are absolutely people who want that dynamic in, and so there are people who identify as unicorns and say, like, I want to be a third in a couple for this duration. I'm setting the parameters, and it's very possible, as you say, to do it in a healthy way. I think it's really important to understand the power dynamics there and situational power. And I think what you were referencing that's so important to tune into, that was a really important exploration within my family, was couples privilege, and that I've been with and that legally I am bound to my husband. And when we go to school for our kiddo, we are the established parents and there's no issue. And so when my husband and I each have a long-term partner who our kiddo, so we were referring to them as step parents, and our kiddo said that they were his extra parents because they were extra special, which just like floated my heart into a million rainbows and sunshine.
That is so cute.
That's so cute. I love that. Honestly, I definitely like feel that. I've been navigating what that will look like with both my partners as well, given that both of them are like long-term relationships. And it's like, what does it look like to build a future with like multiple people in a world that is very much like monogamy is centered and prioritized and all those things. And hearing that story about like your kiddo who just like see like they just have like multiple parents, like they're just like vibing. That like gives me a lot of hope as well. Like I don't have any kids right now. Who knows what that journey is gonna look like eventually. But that just like gives me a lot of warm fuzzies. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So we were at a choir concert and I was sitting with him. His brain is super special and wonderful, and he needed a little extra attention. So I was sitting with him in the like among all of the very small children. And there's like little Lelia, little. And he's talking to his friend and he goes, and this is not accurately reflecting the gender of my partner, but we're working on language, but he goes, that's my mom's dad, that's my mom's mom, that's my mom's girlfriend, that's my dad's girlfriend, that's my dad, and this is my mom. And she
Yeah.
hugs me really big and he goes, and that's my family. And I just, one of my biggest fears was the impact of coming out publicly for my kiddo. And the other piece, and have y'all read Hijab Butch Blues?
No, but it is on the to be read pile. Yeah.
It's so good. And one
Anything
of
that is queer and desi, I'm like on it.
So what the author talks about is, in some ways, hiding was a way of showing love to family, because she knew, and I think she uses she, her. I actually don't remember. I apologize. But I'm going to use she, her because I think that's right. And she says, hiding was actually an act of love because it allowed me to sustain this relationship that I couldn't otherwise. And it really struck me because for so many years of my life, hiding was a form of love within my like pretty conservative South Louisiana family that's really Catholic. And losing the love, and she's got a really powerful line about like losing the love of my family is the biggest fear and the biggest threat. And losing the love of my two septuagenarian Catholic aunts, who like are super important to me, was one of my biggest fears. And they both responded beautifully. They were like, honey, I don't totally understand what you're saying, but like, and we've never talked about it again, and that's fine. But the other fear I had was about how my kiddo would be received, how he would feel about these people. And obviously we're really intentional about who we introduce him to. But what has struck me so deeply, and Tully Mosley has a beautiful series on non-monogamous moms. And one of them wrote, and I apologize that I don't remember her name, but she said, we're going to have to explain that monogamy is actually the dominant relationship structure. Like, he truly doesn't know that. And he's 5 years old and he's just like, that's my mom, that's my mom's partner is the language we use, that's my dad, that's my dad's girlfriend. And like, it's neutral. These are people who love me. These are people who do bedtime, who take me on trips, who take good care of me. And that's what my family looks like. And this is not a big deal. And I really celebrate that. And that's been a really important part of my journey, is being like, what's the alternative? That his friends' parents think I'm cheating, that I'm being a liar and unfaithful to our family, that my husband's cheating. Like, what's the solution here? To like stay in the closet until he's in college? Well, that doesn't seem like a good plan. And so I think the way that kids react, I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. Guess this is what we're doing, is so validating of like, monogamy is a social script that we've all been indoctrinated with, and that is different from the truth of humanity.
For sure. As a person who has a background in primatology, for sure. Like the research that I did was all comparative between like chimpanzees and humans and gorillas and humans. And yeah, it's our common ancestors are not not at all rigidly monogamous. But I did, just to throw in, I did look it up real quick, and the author of Hijab Butch Blues uses she, they. So perfect. You did great.
I appreciate you looking it up.
Yeah, and I think on the topic of some of these kind of misconceptions as well, I'm wondering what all of you have as far as advice for those who may be on the journey of like understanding themselves and how they may even figure out whether polyamory might be right for them, or maybe it's just something they're exploring and unsure of, or maybe they just want to know more about it, because the more we know about anything, it can help us be more inclusive and compassionate and all of the things towards each other. Like, what advice do you all have for our new explorers?
That's a great question. Because I definitely did not have anyone giving me advice when I started my polyamory journey. Like I knew some folks who identified as polyamorous or at least were engaging in polyamory. But I didn't really have any advice givers. So I feel like that's a really good question. For me personally, I just feel like communication is honestly the biggest thing. Something that I don't think I realized just how important it is when I first started my journey as a youth, and also just like when I started having two romantic partners 6 years ago is when that happened. I just like didn't realize like how communication is like the foundation of relationships. So I feel like that is probably my biggest piece of like communicate. Even if you're over communicating, that's okay. We can do that. We're allowed to do that. Um, Communication, safety, consent, all those things. Again, those things just seem so like it's like these are things that we know, but we don't realize how in non-monogamy they're even more pressing. Um, so I would say that's the advice that I have. And it's also just okay if things are fluid. Like maybe for a while you're exploring polyamory, and if it's not for you, that's okay. And I think it is possible to have like both healthy non-monogamous and monogamous relationships. Like I don't think that one or the other is better, but I think it's okay to like, you know, explore and figure out, what works best for you. And also just like it may change based on the partners that you have, on the partner that you have. It may change based on like your environment or, the supports that you have in your lives. Like so many things can shift how we navigate relationships, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be static, like literally anything else.
Everything is fluid.
Yes.
I definitely echo the communication thing. And just to like put it into an explicit way, whenever I have like a new partner or like a change happening, or like right now I'm moving, so like we're gonna start doing it again. I will do like a weekly check-in with my partners where I literally go through a checklist of like, it's like what worked well this week, what didn't work well this week. And I stole it from a polyamorous social media person, Remodeled Love. And it's like a 10-point checklist, and I've added some things to it. There's also one called The Radar that I think is from Multiamory is maybe the name of that group. But yeah, so the just doing that regularly whenever I know there's going to be transition points, and obviously opening a relationship or like starting a new relationship style, even if it's just to try it, would be a transition point. So like the good thing about doing regular check-ins is that you can catch things before they become things. So like when something is small, sometimes people feel kind of self-judgment about bringing it up. It's like, well, I don't know if this is a big enough deal to like bring this up, and like if I am I being like too insecure, too needy, or like whatever sort of thing, and then like leaving it alone until it actually is big enough that it's like, okay, well, now it's a problem and I have to say something. Now there's resentment, and now there's like a buildup of emotions behind it and that kind of thing. Whereas if you are regularly checking in, you get in the habit of just like figuring out where folks are and explicitly saying like, hey, this is what's going on for me right now. Another thing is, and this is really, really hard if it's not, or at least it has been for me, if you're not necessarily like practiced or used to it, of like not being responsible for other people's feelings,
Uh,
and not making other people responsible for your own, which like, you can say like, hey, you did this thing and it made me jealous, so you have to stop. Or you can say, when you did the thing, I felt jealous. Could we explore that and figure out like where that's coming from? Like, is this an insecurity thing? Is this a money thing? Is this a time thing? Is this a I wanted to finish that show with you thing, where it's like simply that simple of like, how dare you watch our sitcom with someone else? Like, so just like very explicitly communicating on a regular basis of checking in so that you're used to checking in would be like one tip. And then the other one would be like, get familiar with feelings and conflict resolution. And I'm like neurodivergent AF because I literally have like a checklist whenever I do conflict resolution, and I get out a feelings wheel like we're toddlers, because
Yes.
a lot of people from my generation just like, we're not taught explicitly how to name your feelings or feel them or process them. So like initially sometimes folks feel like I'm being condescending but I'm like, I promise this will make it so much better. Where I literally will send a feelings wheel and like a list of like, here are the steps of our conflict resolution we're going to do today. And then like it may sound like more like admin work, but in a little bit it is. It's like emotional admin work. And then once that's out of the way, you can get to the fun parts of like connecting with new humans and that sort of thing without having the like implicit baggage of not knowing where everyone's at, or like being concerned that maybe there's something somebody's not telling you because you're talking about it, so you know everything. So for me, information feels like safety. So that would be, those are my three things, I guess. Communication of regular check-ins, figuring out how to like own your own feelings and not be responsible for other people's feelings, and then like, yeah, I don't know, feelings wheel.
Kelly, I really love that you said the feelings wheel, because I definitely do that with my partners as well as a weekly check-in. So I'm like, are we all just doing this? I don't know. I also wanted to add to what I said as well, and just be like, try to be aware of your capacity, because I feel like for like new polyamorous folks, it's like, wow, we could date as many people and have like super close relationships with so many people. Wow. That doesn't work a lot of the time, because we're still human and we still have capacities. So being aware of capacity also, I just want to add that to the list as well.
I really appreciate both of your reflections and will echo and amplify them. So with regard to communication, my long-term partner recommended or asked for check-ins with the whole polycule. And so we now call them family meetings. We have them once a month. We had them in advance of my kiddo's birthday because I was feeling a lot of anxiety about like how this kid, my kiddo, our kiddo would be received, and how our partners would feel like loved and supported and celebrated, and simultaneously center the kiddo and like lots of children and a playground and food and etc. And it was incredible. It was so deepening in our relationship because we were so intentional about like, what's everyone's biggest fear? What are some insecurities we have? And so I was like, my best friend, Sarah, knew my partner and my husband's partner. And so we all got together, and Sarah was on deck to like be somebody that was safe for everyone to talk to if they needed like a support person. And now, and like everyone in the polycule has said, like, and polycule is a group of people who are dating one another in some form. And sometimes all of the people are dating one another. I don't date my husband's long-term partner, but we are deeply in love as like life partners, and she's incredible. And one of my favorite people, I actually wrote a piece for Business Insider about like buying her a Valentine and how like deep in love I am and how excited I was about our Valentines. And it's a totally platonic, like lifelong partnership. And that capacity to, and we have like many Google Docs where we strategize, and we like have the bike rack. It used to be called a parking lot. We try to be more environmentally friendly, but like the kind of like spaghetti at the wall, like everything that anyone's thinking, like, you know, one person asked, like, when should I use she? When should I use they as pronouns? And like, what a great question to ask within this setting so that you don't have to remember it at all times. You can just like have that sidebar or in the comments of the Google Docs. So Google Docs is one of my recommendations. The other is really to find, one of the challenges of this moment, I believe, is as polyamory is getting more media coverage, it is often amplifying really harmful frameworks and abusive partnerships or abusive relationships. And I think particularly for people who are new to polyamory, there's a real vulnerability there. I had a friend come to me who was actually dating one of my other friends, and she said, this doesn't feel right. And I said, but she's like, but I don't know because it's all new. And I wasn't sure if this was like just jealousy I was supposed to work through, or if this was actually inappropriate behavior. And I was really clear with her, was like, no, he is being harmful. He is being manipulative. What is happening right now under the veil of polyamory is actually a really, fuckboy behavior, right? Like this is really harmful, gender neutral, harmful behavior. And so what I would offer is to find resources and outlets that you're using your best judgment to see people doing it in a consensual and ethical way. And one of the reasons I say consensual non-monogamy instead of ethical non-monogamy is I could say, let's say Sam and I are dating and I'm like, well, Sam knows I'm dating other people. That doesn't mean that I'm doing it in an ethical way. I want to know that Sam has consented to the behavior I'm engaging in, that everyone is consenting enthusiastically, and even when it's uncomfortable. I am so excited and cannot wait to amplify the hell out of TJ Alexander's new book. It's called Triple Sec, and it's a poly rom-com. And TJ is trans non-binary. There is brilliant representation across gender, across queer identity, and it is a beautiful, light, and very steamy read. And one of the challenges I have found is to offer resources that don't feel like homework. And even for me, who's writing a memoir about queer polyamory, so much of the literature out there, like Polysecure, I highly recommend over The Ethical Slut by Jessica Fern, and their workbooks and things like that. And it feels like homework. That's no fun. I listened to it and I read it with a friend because I was like, dear God, I know I need to read this. And it was super helpful, but at the same time, it was really annoying and felt like work. And so I think, my goal with my platform is to amplify voices that are talking about polyamory in a really intentional way and giving you access points that may be more aligned with your interests or exposure. And so Remodeled Love is a favorite, Kelly. You mentioned Multiamory, which I think is another great resource. They have a podcast as well.
You say the part about homework, but I'm such a nerd. I love that. All of my relationships involve homework. I feel like anytime I get off the phone with a friend, or I just finished hanging out with a friend, I have 2 new books I need to read and an article that I need to read that I need to report back on, and vice versa for them. So I feel like that just might be variation in taste, because I love the homework. But I'm a forever nerd.
I love the homework, and I had a book club with a friend to debrief each chapter. So don't get me wrong, I love the homework, but it was I needed the accountability buddy, because I was this is the book I wish I had 13 years ago.
Yeah.
This is not, most of it wasn't new to me. But Sam, I think you brought up something that I want to touch on from Polysecure, which is about polyamory as a sexual orientation or relational orientation, and polyamory as situational. And I think that distinction is really powerful. So I am someone who identifies as polyamory by orientation, foundational to who I am as a person and how I relate to the world around me is that I am polyamorous. For other people, this is just the type of relationship they're in. And there's no judgment. Those are neutral. But I do think that was a helpful framework that I took away from Polysecure, that part of why I felt like coming out as polyamorous was really important to me is it is how I see the world, how I relate both in my friendships. Rohan, I loved that framing of this is my platonic life partner. And our therapists know about each other and we reference therapy to each other. That's the kind of relationships I want to be in. And that's not based on sexuality. So it's both.
Both and.
This is so good. Yeah.
I have, so you were saying about people who are new to polyamory being susceptible to the trap of people using the term polyamory to be irresponsible and to not be held accountable. So I do want to make a slight amendment. That's the one. One of those words. Amendment to what I said earlier about owning your own emotions and not being responsible for other people's. So you are not responsible for other people's feelings, but you do need to acknowledge and be aware of your impact. So like those are separate things. So saying that you're responsible for somebody else's emotions is like they're sad and now it's your job to make them feel better. And that is the part that I'm saying is not true. If you are repeatedly harming someone by doing a behavior that you know makes them uncomfortable, that you've had this conversation and maybe like this is something where either this is a fundamental incompatibility or you're just choosing to kind of be a jerk, that's not the same thing as you're not responsible for everyone's other people's emotions. So just to put that in there. And then also about communication, explicitly stating expectations is another really good one. Because if you're going to be in a situation where maybe your partner's there and a meta is going to be there, well, what kind of PDA are you comfortable with? What kind of PDA are they comfortable with? What kind like who is allowed to know what about what how much of your business is their business, like getting consent around what kind of things you can share. And that, so like explicitly stating expectations is another good beginner tip.
And just to clarify, metamor is, I think, what you were referencing when you said meta. And for people who are new to polyamory, metamor is, for example, my husband's girlfriend. It's your partner's partner who you may or may not be or romantically involved with.
Yeah, so the person I'm dating is my paramour, and the person they're dating is my metamor. And there is a meta Valentine's Day. It's in March.
That's cute.
Cool.
Or is it at the end of February? But it's around there somewhere.
I was gonna say time just flew. I feel like we need to have a part 2 at some point. Honestly, there's like so much more we can go into that I wish we could have. And so just any final words?
Yeah, this has just been a very beautiful conversation. It's been lovely to connect with you folks. And it's funny how many overlaps we all have, even though we all live in different places. It's pretty cool that they're just like, there is like non-monogamous culture and polyamorous culture that I feel like we just like share. So I think that's super cool to just like find community in different spaces. And, you know, for folks who are listening, it's okay to figure things out, and it's okay if you don't know. Feel free to take time to figure it out and explore and play and have fun and be safe, be ethical. Yeah, I feel like that kind of sums it up. Awesome. I appreciate y'all.
Bye. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet y'all. Bye.
As polyamory is, and any form of non-monogamy is becoming a larger part of the cultural conversation, my hope is that monogamy stops being the default and people are opting into whatever relational model works best for them. And so I've been asked, are you smug about your polyamory, or do you want to convert everyone to polyamory? And it's far from it. My sole purpose in being so vocal about polyamory is really to offer it as another framework. And for some people, it may be romantic fidelity or sexual fidelity, but a broader deepening of relationships outside of their primary one. I personally ascribe to a non-hierarchical form of polyamory where each of my partners has the same agency, the same value in my life and primacy. And it's a work in progress. I am really grateful to be in relationship and a family of 5 now. And my Christmas card was all 5 of us in front of the Christmas tree with flannel. And I'm grateful to the people who came before me modeling polyamory. And grateful for this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having us, Sam. This was really good. You did a great job of, what did you say at the beginning of introducing people who you think would get along? Like, yeah, they seem cool. But yeah, I think just like for folks who are maybe like new or trying it out, you don't have to be perfect because people aren't perfect. And just like, I guess take it slow. That thought that Rohan said about capacity is real. Like I think sometimes folks get real excited and just want to date everyone. But like love is not limited. Time and money and energy are. But yeah, same. Like polyamory isn't necessarily like better or worse than anything else. You're gonna find bad actors who are in monogamous relationships. You're gonna find bad actors that are in polyamorous relationships. There's going to be abusive and toxic polyamorous relationships. There's going to be abusive and toxic monogamous relationships, and healthy and loving in both. So it's less a matter of is this better or worse, and more a matter of just so you know this exists. It's an option. Like this is also one of the choices, and that is something that I definitely did not have as a young person. So being vocal about it is great that you're putting that representation out there. Yeah. And hopefully this has been helpful to anybody who is listening, who is trying to learn stuff.
Oh yeah, I definitely thank you all so much for participating in this. Representation really is so important, especially for those who are on any part of their discovery journey. It's a lot of times, because we don't have that language, we have to hear it specifically said in a certain way or a specific story. And that's what gets that light bulb to kind of go off and be like, oh, I think that's me. I think that's what that is. And without that, it's so hard to navigate, because we're just raised in our little bubbles and just that own bubble of experience. And so it's we often need to have context to these experiences to know what it might mean for us. So I really appreciate even just your openness to share with me here. One of my biggest takeaways, I think, is something I kind of already knew, but you all just confirmed it. One of the biggest misconceptions is it takes a lot of healthy communication, there's a lot of healthy boundaries and things that just involve healthy relations with people. And that can be in all areas of our lives. You don't just have to be, subscribed to a certain thing to use healthy forms of communication with others. So thank you all so much. This was so good. I think a lot of people will benefit from this.